So when we talk about the Lusaka Manifesto, I feel like it ties in very nicely to the next point that I would like to highlight, which is the Lusaka Accord. And the Lusaka Accord, or the Lusaka Agreement, as some people refer to it as, was signed on the 7th of September 1974 between the Front for the Liberation of Mozambique, Frelimo, and the Portuguese government. This agreement declared the independence of Mozambique and the end of a 400-year occupation and colonial rule. It also declared the end of a guerrilla war that had been raging on for about 10 years up until that point. So this agreement set up a provisional government headed by Frelimo that presided over the gradual transition of power from the Portuguese colonial administration to Frelimo, and full independence would be achieved by June 25th, 1975. This was a landmark victory for the two states of Tanzania and Zambia that were actively spearheading the push for liberation of Southern African states from colonial rule. It was even more of a victory because both Tanzania and Zambia had offered refuge and support to Frelimo from its founding all throughout its liberation struggle. I believe Frelimo was founded in Tanzania, or when it was founded, it opened up one of its first headquarters in Tanzania, which would move to Zambia for a couple of years around the mid-60s. But the first headquarters that Frelimo had would have been in Tanzania. So the defeat of Portugal and the liberation of Mozambique was one that was received with much ire by the minority Portuguese population that dwelled within Mozambique, as is typically the case with independence that is achieved in Africa. And there were quite a few reported outbreaks of violence by the Portuguese. The New York Times reported on this on September 7th, 1974. And I'm going to read a small excerpt from that article. And you can also check it out online because all of this stuff is available online for free. But yeah, this is an excerpt from that report. Several hand grenades exploded here early today following violent demonstrations by groups of whites protesting against talks between Portugal and the Front for the Liberation of Mozambique, which have led to the announcement of Mozambique's independence. The grenade explosions, one at the university and several others near an African suburb on the outskirts of the capital, followed a rampage by hundreds of young whites who broke windows and tried to set fire to a political group's offices, end quote. So this, of course, is on the back of Portugal having been one of the only two countries that voted against a motion at the UN to adopt the Lusaka Manifesto in 1969, along with South Africa. The Lusaka Manifesto being a very crucial document and doctrine that played a significant role in helping achieve the independence of Mozambique. So through the Lisbon-Salisbury-Pretoria axis, which was a multilateral sort of coalition that was created by the colonial administrations in Southern Africa, along with pretty much every European country, including Britain. Portugal also played a major role in illegally supplying Rhodesia with military and economic support by smuggling weapons from European manufacturers into Rhodesia and by funneling Rhodesian trade through Portuguese companies and masking that there was business that was being funneled to Rhodesia through various shell companies that were opened in Portugal and were also opened in many, many other European countries. I'm sure those of you who are aware or know something about the Second Chimurenga will know that the Rhodesian fowl is often referred to as the right arm of the West. I believe that is the term that is used. But for anybody who knows anything about guns, the fowl is a firearm that was developed and created by FN Herstal, which is a company from Belgium. And the only way that Rhodesia was able to get access and import so many fowls into Rhodesia to field the Rhodesian army in this armed struggle was because of Portugal, because there were front-facing sanctions that were issued against Rhodesia, and those sanctions had to be followed, or countries had to pretend as if they were following those sanctions, which is exactly what they did. So the following is an excerpt I'm going to read from a book where Ken Flower, who was a police officer and intelligence operative in Rhodesia, actually an intelligence chief in the Central Intelligence Organization of Rhodesia, speaks about all of this activity that was going on between various European states and the country of Rhodesia itself. Those who worked behind the scenes in the evasion of sanctions were legion. Senators and congressmen from the United States of America, representatives of British and French companies who concealed their origins by dealing through South Africa or elsewhere, Swiss, Italian, and Japanese businessmen who came and went without any qualms, West Germans who, amongst other things, arranged to send an expensive printing press in a disguised Rhodesian Air Force plane so that Rhodesian banknotes could be printed locally, not in Britain. Greeks and Jews who were more than ready to set up dummy companies and disguise the Rhodesian origins or destination of certain goods, and Russians who plied their ships in and out of Mozambican ports to load Rhodesian chromite. So yes, for all those of you who I will refer to as simps for the Soviet Union and for socialist Russia, it turns out that socialist Russia also got its hands quite dirty when it came to supporting the Rhodesians. Everybody was involved in this, and it also creates a more interesting conversation, because when you look at people and the conversation or the dialogue that happens online about why Rhodesia fell and why it didn't survive, you will have a lot of these nostalgic cave-dwelling troglodytes who are constantly talking about, oh, Rhodesia fell because it was abandoned by the West. And the reality, at least the reality according to Ken Flower, who was an intelligence chief and somebody who was very, very aware of the inner workings of the Rhodesian government, the reality is that the West didn't actually abandon Rhodesia. They were very much in bed with them. And at every single step that the Rhodesians were trying to quell the rebellion that was happening against them, they had the full support of Europe and the United States. They had the full support of the West. And even with all of that support that the Rhodesians had from all of these countries that they were very clearly involved with in engaging with economic activity, in engaging with arms smuggling, in engaging with various forms of help and aid that was being rendered to the Rhodesians secretly, they still fell. Rhodesia didn't fall because it was abandoned by the West. Rhodesia failed because it was not a feasible project that could happen without the mass extinction and ethnic cleansing that they actually tried to engage in and failed at miserably. That's why Rhodesia fell, and for no other reason. So for anybody who tells you about Rhodesia being abandoned by the West and Rhodesia falling because the West got cold feet and couldn't stand by their brothers, it's complete bullshit. Tell them to go read a fucking book. So Tinashe Nyamunda, who wrote a very, very interesting paper about this whole situation and gives some very, very useful insights on the Salisbury-Pretoria Lisbon axis, goes on to say this in that particular paper. As a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Portugal's relationship with Rhodesia facilitated some of these secret dealings. The use of Mozambique was just as beneficial to Rhodesia and Portugal as it was to the Russians, who flouted sanctions and bought Rhodesian chrome for the bigger cause of their Cold War effort. The same can be said for American and other foreign businessmen who gained access to Rhodesian business through trilateral relations established with Rhodesia through the Axis. If anything, successive U.S. administrations practiced a policy of cautious, measured hostility against Rhodesia, whom they never wanted to absolutely alienate. In the case of Britain, economic sanctions were initially inadequate because of its kith and kin considerations, which resulted in an error of judgment that contributed to the many uncomfortable moments with which successive British governments were burdened for the 15 years before majority rule. The vacuum left by Britain in southern Rhodesia was filled by Portugal as its main European ally, and London could not apply pressure beyond the diplomatic appeals to Pretoria to stop supporting Rhodesia. Against this backdrop, even British companies that could not officially do business in Rhodesia utilized the back door provided by the Axis. End quote. So there you have it. I know we started this talking about the independence of Mozambique, but we went on a bit of a tangent and ended up getting involved in Rhodesia, which we will touch on a bit more as the podcast goes. But yeah, the relation, obviously, like from the standpoint of liberation, the relation between Zimbabwe, Zambia, South Africa is inseparable. Just as it is inseparable when it comes to the fight against the liberation of, South Africa, the fight against the liberation of Mozambique, the fight against the liberation of Zimbabwe. Those three things are inseparable.